Okay, so today we're going to be reviewing chapter 12 in the Biblical Hebrew book. They are hoping that they're being kind to you by not giving you any new vocabulary. On page 106, the vocabulary that you already had, up until now we've been learning it as perfect tense, which is past tense, and now we are doing it as imperfect, which is what you might want to think of as future tense. And so we can go through them. We'll zoom through those vocabulary words first. You notice that they're showing them to you in the three root letters, the shoresh, which means root. So the first word is aleph kaf lamed, which has to do with eating. So if I wanted to say I ate in the past tense and I use that verb, how would I say I ate? For
Achalti.
Achalti, thank you. So the second word is aleph memresh, which means say. So if I wanted to say you masculine singular ate, how would I say that? Ata.
Achalta?
Yeah, that would be good if it were achal. We're working on amar. Amar.
Oh,
Achalta
sorry.
is perfect if it were achal, but for amar, it would be, you said?
Marta?
Amarta, good. And so then this one is important to know. This is fairly common word. They're all fairly common, but hey lamed chaf, if I wanted to say you feminine walked or went.
Be halachta, right?
Would be halacht with a t at the end, right?
Halacht, that's right.
It's at halacht.
And
then remembered, if I wanted to say he remembered, how would I say he remembered? And this is the easy one because this is the stripped down yay verb version. And I mean yay verb. Those are the two vowels. So it would be who?
That's just zachar.
Zachar, just zachar. So far, I hope that you're remembering that what you've got there, and this is past tense, and it's just a quick review because we're supposed to be talking about future tense, about imperfect, is that you have the three root letters, the core of the verb, and then you're adding your markers after the verb is over, past the verb, we like to say, so that it's marking past tense. So we had achalti for the first verb, amarta, halacht, and then zachar. So what if it were the he form for no, she knew?
Yadat?
It's not a ta, it's just a hey at the end. It's yad'a. He yad'a. He yad'a. So it'd be like shamarti, shamarta, shamart, shamar, shamra, right? That's the one I want you to have in your head. Know that better than you know where your teeth are when you're brushing your teeth. Shamarti, shamarta, shamart. So they have a line here. I think my line's better. They said, like, know it as well as you know your multiplication table. I'm like, that's what calculators are for. But you have to find your teeth. That's all I'm going to say. Just kidding. So shamarti, because it's ani, ata shamarta, at shamart, hu shamar, he shamra. The same thing. If we went through this, we would say achalti, achalta, achalt, achal, achla, amarti, amarta, amart, amar, amra. I'm sorry if I'm going so fast, but that's not what we're supposed to be learning today. I'm afraid that may have been what happened last time I tried to teach the drop letters, is that I reviewed too long on the other things. So we're up to sit, settle, or reside. Reminds me of shake, rattle, and roll. I don't know why. Yud, shin, vet. We are up to anachnu. How would we say we resided, we settled, we sat? Anachnu.
Yavnu.
Yashavnu. Yashavnu. So we're adding the nu at the end. And if I wanted to say y'all wrote, masculine or mixed, y'all masculine or mixed wrote, you'd say atem wrote.
Katav tem?
Good, katav tem. And I want to point out that it's important to remember that for the atem and the aten, the accent shifts to the end of the word. And you don't have a kamatz in the past tense, you have a moving shra. Katav tem. And then if it's aten, it would be katav ten. I don't remember if they teach that to you. I think that there's no place in the Torah where it shows you that, the aten form. And then if we take took, we take they took, hem or hema. We go to lakhu, lakhu, where you take the three root letters. There's still a kamatz under the first one, but it ends with u, lakhu. If I wanted to say henna, you would still say malchu. If I wanted to say I found, I would say ani matzati. If I wanted to say I opened, I would say ani patachti. I had the T ending. If I wanted to say I called, ani called, I would say ani karati. The vowel is going to change a little bit because the last root letter is an aleph. So we have to mess with some of those things for the past tense. We don't have to worry about that right here, but we can review that if you want. I sent is ani shalachti, and I heard or listened is ani shamati, and I guarded or kept is ani. Here comes my favorite one, shamarti. That's when we want to learn all well. So this is just review, but you're also supposed to know by the end of this chapter, both in the perfect, which means the past tense form, and the imperfect form. And then it really bothers me that they start their paragraph with unfortunately. This is my least favorite paragraph, my least favorite page. Unfortunately. They started off so well, not having to make me learn any new verbs. I really liked that. And then they go to unfortunately. And I'm just going to read what they say here. I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. I don't think it's as bad as they're making it sound, but I have a feeling that one of the reasons why we have a mental block is because they started their paragraph with unfortunately. Some of the most common verbs in the Bible. Notice that we're only on chapter 12. We're not even halfway through the book. And that means that the words we're learning are the most common words in all of Tanakh. But the most common verbs in the Bible are irregular in the imperfect tense. By irregular, they don't mean what I mean. What they mean by irregular is you have a pattern, like what I said with shamarti, shamarta. All of your consonants are there, all the vowels are there. The vowels are the right vowels, the values you expect. That's what they call regular. I am going to tell you that there are verbs that are regular, but they're not the same as shamarti. We've seen that. So, for example, if I have lakach at the top of the left column, it is going to be regular for any verb that ends in the third root letter is a chet. It's going to follow the exact same pattern every single time. So I call that regular. I just see it as, one of those I before E, except I just see it as anytime you have a lamed chet verb, it's always going to do the same thing. So I see that as regular. Not matching the regular pattern of shamar, but it's going to be regular. That makes sense? So I'm not going to start with unfortunately, and I'm going to say irregular doesn't mean what they think it means. In the imperfect tense, though, let's see what they're imperfect about. The chapter is going to introduce some of these irregular verbs. Some verbs in the imperfect tense may seem very unusual. Verbs that begin with these letters, yud, which is a kind of a weak letter, vav, which is a weak letter, nun, lamed, hey. I think I don't know what they want you to do here. They do this in a very strange order. It's not alphabetical. I don't know what they were doing. Yud, vav, nun, lamed, or hey. If the third root letter, if the very first root letter, all we're worrying about here is the very first root letter. If the first root letter is one of those 5 letters, those are weak consonants and they may drop out. They may get absorbed into the process. And you can kind of see why. If I tell you, for example, that the yud is a weak letter here, mostly because, because it's really kind of a vowel letter. The hey is a vowel letter, the vav is a vowel letter, so they sometimes act as vowels and sometimes as consonants. That's going to make it weaker. The nun is a weak letter because of where it is in your mouth. It drops out a lot in English too. That's the way we make it, that it kind of gets absorbed by other letters. So that's going to be a weak letter. And the lamed is a weak letter, and we'll see why. It just winds up that it's also one of those letters that just kind of gets swallowed up in the middle of the word. So you can kind of use your imagination to see how these forms came about. But anyway, it's going to show you. Below are 4 of the most common drop letter imperfect verbs. And they're trying to show it to you because the key here is you have to know the root well enough to recognize it even if there's 2 letters left. So the drop letter part of this is that the first letter of the root is going to drop out, be absorbed into the process. So they're showing you, for example, that when the root is yud dalet ayin, for yada, like yadati, yadata, where it stays fairly regular, when you see it in the future tense, in the imperfect tense, you're not going to see that yud. You're only going to see those two letters. Da. The lakach word, when you see it in the future tense, you're not going to see the lamed, you're only going to see kach. Would you recognize kach if I was reading it, would it make you think of lakach? If I saw what looks like a verb, but it only has the kach part, would you think of lakach? I would hope so by now. I mean, you only know this many verbs. So these are very common verbs, so I'd hope so. Or yashav, if you only saw the shav part, would it make you think of sitting or dwelling? Or lech. We just did this last week. We did lech lecha. Part of it is the future tense is also going to become the core for our imperative, for the command form. So some of these things are really easy to remember. If you grew up speaking Hebrew, then you're going to hear commands. You're going to hear lech, get out of this room, go away, lech. Or you're going to hear shev, sit, because you have to tell your dog that all day long. Shev, 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 sit. You're going to use these words a lot in the future tense, in the command form, and the command form is a part of the future tense. So anyway, you've got to become familiar with the verbs. And right now, the comforting thing is you only have a finite number of verbs. The next thing that I want you to do, though, it's back here. We have to find the page where it is remember, even though we did, all right, so page 95, I think, is the one where it shows it off the best. Keep your finger here and go to page 95. 95, what I like about this is that they are highlighting the things that are what they're calling, I think, the signal letters or something, the markers. I call them the markers. So for ani, in the past tense, you add a T at the end, the past it. For ani in the future tense, you add an aleph at the beginning of it. We think of it as like kind of in front of the future and what's in front of us. So for you need to remember these signal letters. For ani, it's at the beginning of the word. For ata, it's T at the beginning of the word. For at, it's T at the beginning of the word and E at the end of a word. That's how I know it's the difference between ata and at. For who, now in the past tense, we stripped down the verb and all we had were the three root letters. For who, it's a yud at the beginning of a word. And for he, it's a tav at the beginning of the word. And this is where things get complicated, because if you look at you will guard masculine singular and she will guard feminine singular, they're the same exact verb. Ata tishmor, he tishmor. It's identical. And I gave you my brilliant words of wisdom about that, where I said, this is how I save myself in this. I don't think of it as the same word. I think of it as two different words. It is the same word, but I think of it as two different words. If I'm reading along, it is rare that I'm going to confuse whether I'm talking to a masculine singular guy or about a feminine female person. It's really rare that I'm going to get confused about it. In context, it's going to be really, really easy. So I just think of them as if they were two separate words. I forget sometimes. I get, oh, look, they look the same. Wait, have they always looked the same? They've always looked the same. What? I forget. And then in the plural, we have for anachnu, we have a nun, and it doesn't come at the end, it comes at the beginning. And for atem, we have a tav at the beginning, just like we had for ata and at, but we have an u at the end. And we've already seen an u at the end to be a plural marker, so that shouldn't bother us. That's what we had for they guarded. We would say shamru, and now we're going to say tishmeru. Is the ta at the beginning is for the you will, and the u it's y'all will. It's the plural. And then for the feminine, for aten, we're going to say tishmorna. So we have the ta for the second person and the na for the feminine. And then the they form, hem or henma, we have yishmeru. We have the yud showing third person masculine. We have the u showing plural. That should be fairly easy. This one is sad again. We get to the third person plural, feminine plural, and we have tishmorna. Why is there a tav at the beginning of that instead of you would expect maybe something else? No, because the he form is a tav at the beginning. And tishmorna, well, that looks a lot like you will guard. How come you will guard and you all will guard and they all will guard is the same thing? The same advice that I gave you before. Pretend it's not the same word, and just remember that the way you say it is tishmorna for y'all will guard, and tishmorna for they will guard, feminine plural. So the point about reviewing this is that it's really important that you remember what the future tense markers are, because it is going to be a key to figuring out when you have a drop letter imperfect. You have to remember the part of the word that is a stripped down version of the root, and you have to remember the part of the word that is the marker that tells you who's doing the futured thinging in the verb. So let's take a look at them. On 107, they have they're listing 4 verbs of the ones that they showed you there, and they're showing it to you in all of the forms. You don't have to memorize how they're spelled, they're saying, because remember that you're going to have to just recognize them. You don't have to write your own Torah. I mean, you can copy a Torah if you really want to. We're all commanded to write a Torah. That's one of the commandments. But it's not going to be write your own Torah, make it up as you go along Torah. That's not the commandment. You're not going to be doing that. If you wanted to be writing your own words in Hebrew, we could work on that in a conversational Hebrew class. That's not what's happening here. So let's take a look at them, and I'll show you what happens and how it looks. So if you can remember that the lech part is the part that represents halach, then look at the elech, and you see the aleph at the beginning, and you see the lech that ends it, and you know that it means I will walk or I will go. If you see the telech, then hopefully you see that the lech reminds you of something. Oh yeah, it means walk. The tav at the beginning means either you, masculine singular, will walk, or she will walk. Same exact word, as long as you recognize that what happened here was that it was a drop letter. Telchi is for at, and this one, remember, it's not just the lech form, but you need the e ending because it's feminine singular for at. And then you get the yelech, which is the yud at the beginning is the marker for who, and then we did telech already. You see a nun as a marker with the lech ending, that means anachnu. And then telchu, we see the tav at the beginning, that's a marker. And the u at the end means that it's a tav, but plural, it's a tem or ten. It's a tem. Then telachna, that one's fun. Telachna is for a ten. There's the tav at the beginning, you hear a lech, you see the na at the ending. Hem is the yud marker with the u ending, that means hem or hema. And henna is telachna. It looks just like the one for a 10. So that's the key. The key is it's important to see if you can figure out what the root was and what's going on here. So if you look at your the verbs that we have here, well, all right. I think they pulled out all the verbs that you needed to know. I think that's what's happening. So notice that I wanted to show you the vowel changes in them anyway, even though they said don't worry about it. So notice that halach and yashav, those were fairly standard-ish verbs when in the past tense. The lakach and yada were regular, but they weren't the same as shamar. And the thing that was different about them was the third root letter. The third root letter was a chet or an ayin. And the chet or ayin always fits into the same category for verbs. So it had a specific change when we did it in the past tense, and it's going to have a specific change in the future tense. So we have so notice that the vowels change, but notice that the vowels are almost exactly the same. So we have ekach and eda. Y is one a long vowel version and the other one a short vowel version. I don't see any good reason for that. Tikach. Actually, there is, I think, a good reason for it. I think there actually is a reason for it. I think that the reason is that the chet at the end is going to act a little bit differently than the ayin at the end. I think that if you took other lamed chet verbs, I think it might be closer to lakach all the time. And I think that the lamed ayin verbs, which means the third root letter is an ayin, I think it's going to be closer to the da. I'm pretty sure. I'm trying to think of other words that do this. But anyway, The key is not to have to memorize whether you've got an E-A or an E-A, but those are the patterns, and you just have to recognize the first letter is the marker, and then the rest of it is your verb, and do you recognize them? And right now you only have 4 verbs you have to worry about. That's it. Those 4 verbs. Just hear them over and over again in your head. Then, does that make sense? Is this a little bit easier than the last time we did this? A little? You're not smiling very well. Lisa looks very not convinced. What's going to happen is I'm going to show you, we're going to go to some of the exercises and we're going to see if we recognize what's happening. But I wanted to cover the next 2 pages quickly. So they're calling these partial drop letter imperfects. All this means is that for a few parts of the conjugation, you're going to have a letter drop out. Not always. On the ones we saw at the top of the page, those letters, the first root letter is always going to drop out in the future tense. But the words amar and achal, they do drop a letter in the future tense, but only in the first person. You don't have the 2 alepphs together. So the aleph pops out. The first root letter is an aleph of the verb, and the aleph is going to drop out when you're trying to conjugate it. So, and it is possible for you to look at a word like ochal or omar and say, oh, look, the future tense marker dropped, and all I have is the root. You could do that if you really want to, but I think that's counterproductive. I think it's easier to say, oh, look, I had to add an aleph to a word that already had an aleph. I have to drop the first letter of the root, because that's already a common thing that we've learned how to do with the drop letter words. Okay, does that make sense? But it really doesn't matter to me how you do it. That's the only time that it's going to change, is when you have a first root letter is an aleph, and you have to add an aleph to the beginning. It doesn't do that for anything else here. It's not, you have a tav at the beginning of a word and the marker starts with a tav. It doesn't care. It's going to have 2 tavs. Does that make some sense? And these 2, the partial drop letter imperfects that start with aleph, those I think are easier to recognize because the aleph is still there. The tricky part is remembering that it's a future tense, ochal. But that's a future tense vowel pattern. So I think that that's going to be easier. And then on the next page, they try to clarify it. And instead of starting with unfortunately, they start with, this is easier than you think. I still don't like the way they're wording it. That wouldn't be me. It's like they already know that you don't get this at all, but here, maybe I can help. That's not a good way to treat people. I'm just sorry. So as I pointed out, which is why I pointed you back to that previous page, look for the imperfect tense, meaning the future tense, signal letters, the markers, the aleph, the tav, the yud, or the nun. So check to see if they're there. If you see those letters, those 4 letters at the beginning, you're looking at something and it's confusing to you, look for those. And then look for the imperfect tense ending signal letters, and most of the time they're not going to be there, but they might be there. So if it was I will do something, I'm not going to see ending markers. It's only for the future tense that are some of the plurals. No, the plurals, the e's. Anyway, look for them. And then see if the 2 letters that remain are the last 2 letters of a verb that's familiar to you. So if you find yelchu, they're telling you, then if you see the yud at the beginning, that could be a future tense marker. And and there's also a u at the end. That means that it's probably a future tense. What's left? Lech. Does that remind me of any verb I know? Yeah, it reminds me of halach. Why are they telling me these mean things now? Be careful. When the first letter of the verb root is a nun, a yud, a tav, or an aleph, which are the signal tense letters, then it could be confusing. It may be difficult to decide whether the letter is part of the verb root or a sign of the imperfect tense. It may cause confusion. You'll see why in a second. Take a look. The root is yeda, he will know, and then compare that to yada, he knew. Does that confuse you?
I can see how that'd be confusing with no vowels for sure.
Yeah, with no vowels it comes very confusing. I'm not going to lie. It's part of what I call gloriously ambiguous. With no vowels, they look identical. So usually you can tell whether you're talking about a future tense or a past tense. Usually. And if not, I mean, if you're not sure, then revel in that and try to figure it out. You know, you get to choose. So
I'm also trying to decide if I should ask the question about if I should ask you to define imperfect or not. Or is
okay,
that
yeah.
too broad a
No,
question?
no, the easy way of defining it, perfect means completed action, and imperfect means a not completed action.
Okay.
So when you say he will, it means that it's not a completed thing. That's officially what biblical Hebrew, the two tenses that exist in biblical Hebrew are completed actions and not completed actions. That's officially what it is. I still call it, I mean, you can very easily think of it in your mind because we think in English. I think everybody here, their first language was English, right? Everybody? So we think in English. We may have learned other languages too, but for the most part, our brain is kind of hardwired now to think in past, present, future kinds of tenses. We can tweak those a little bit in English, we can have like, well, it kind of just happened, or I was thinking, or I thought, and is there differences? In Hebrew, we don't have, a lot of those nuances do not exist at all. And we have a past and a future. And in biblical Hebrew, there is no present tense whatsoever. Doesn't exist. There is a continuing verb form and the gerund form, and that is what we now use as present tense. So the form, you see how it's conjugated in a few places, not many, in Torah, and that is the form that we use as present tense for modern thinkers. But all we have are completed or not complete. Which is part of why I love, for example, the burning bush story. When Moses is standing there and finally says, okay, I'll go, but I have to tell them who sent me. I have to say, you know, everybody's got to know who sent me. The Israelites have to know, and the Pharaoh has to know. And God says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. It's an incomplete action. I will be what I will be. God does not say, I am what I am. And then God says, tell them Ehyeh sent you, which is I, or it could be something like I am becoming. That's the best I'm going to give you, but it's an incomplete action.
So it could be like in the gerund, it could be I am being, or since it's incomplete.
That's not what this is. Yes and no. The yes is that a gerund would be that, but that's not what this form is. This form is an incomplete action. This is the I will be, or this is a future tense. I mean, it's kind of, imagine any of your future tenses. That's what this is. All the future tenses in your brain right now from English, that's what this one is. Ehyeh, it's got that aleph marker at the beginning, and it's got the form that shows that this is not a completed action. I'm not finished with whatever this is, and that's the form that it is. So, becoming, just because that verb implies it didn't finish. And I use as an example in the beginning of the Torah when we were studying the first day of creation for the Hebrew from day one. And so the first day it says God created Bereshit bara Elohim, and the verb is bara. Bara is masculine singular, and it's a completed action. God created. In the beginning, God created. That was a beginning, and it's created, and it's done. And then in the next sentence it says, Ruach Elohim mirachefet al pnei hamayim. Ruach Elohim is the spirit or the wind or the breath, Elohim of God. Mirachefet, that's the gerund form, that's the continuous action. There's no beginning and no end implied in that. Always was, always is, always will be, hovering. Al pnei hamayim, on the face of the waters. So, and then we have the phenomenon which we see in day one. That's one of the coolest things that happens in biblical Hebrew, and that is that when we're going to get to this eventually, but there's a form that you add a v at the beginning of the word, or a va, and you're looking at a future tense verb, but you're supposed to understand it as past tense. You're looking at imperfect, and you're supposed to understand it as past, or you're looking at it as past, and you're supposed to understand it as perfect. And the way you can tell that it's shifted is that the vowels change sometimes, and that, or the accent changes sometimes. It depends on if we're talking about past to future or future to past. And it is just amazing to me that you've got this visual, obvious, almost palpable, the fact that the words are eternal, that they always apply. It's just so cool. I don't know any other language that does that. But anyway, here we go. So it says how to distinguish perfect from imperfect. It's easier than you think. You're still looking for those signal letters. If the signal letter is in the front of the root, then it's imperfect. Future is before you. If the signal letter is past the root, after the root, then it's a past tense. And I know. And the more they say it's easier than you think, it's easier than you think, it's easier than you think, the more they scare me. It's not helping my brain open up to understand what they're saying. So I would like to just take a look at some of these verbs and see if we can, some of the exercises here, and see if we can figure out what happens. And I guess out of these, I'm going to suggest number 3 for now. I don't see why number 1 is where you start off, other than copying. Number 2, actually, number 2 might not be a bad thing. So number 2, you have achalti and ochal. So what's your root?
Root is achal.
Right, aleph kaf lamed achal, and so, which means eat. And you can probably tell me that achalti then means I ate, because the T is at the end, and ochal is I will eat. And the good news is here, they're not giving you anything to try to confuse you. They're not like trying to trick you into having a verb that looks a lot like another verb, and so it's going to be past tense of one verb and future tense of another. And this may help. Some brains are going to be very happy to look at this exercise and see the difference. Some brains are going to say, it doesn't help because past tense is past tense and it doesn't look anything like the future tense. And I wasn't confusing them before. Why are you implying that this could confuse me? So then we have number 2. We have karata and tikra. Can you find the 3-letter root for those two?
Ara.
Kara, kuf, resh, aleph. And so which one is the future tense? Which one is the past tense? How do you translate them?
Karata.
The second one is the future tense.
Right. Tikra is future, and karata is past. And it has to do with, kara means to call or to read. In modern Hebrew, it's also used to mean read a lot. Karata is you called, and tikra means you will call. Obviously, since they're putting them together, they're not implying, and this is where my brain trick helps. There's no reason, if this is the exercise, for you to think, well, do they possibly mean she will call in the second one? No, of course not. They're trying to use the same person for both of them. So karata, you see the ta ending for ata, and that's following it, so it's past tense. And tikra, you see the t beginning for the future tense, so that means you will call. Number 3, katavt and tichtavi.
You wrote.
The root.
You wrote, you feminine singular wrote. For katavt and tichtavi is obviously you will write, and it's feminine singular, and the root is?
Katav.
Right, kaf, tav, vet, exactly, katav. And now we have number 4, we have yomar and amar.
Aleph mem resh.
Aleph mem resh, and it means say, and you've got a future tense and a past tense. Which one is it? Which one's which?
He will say, and he said.
Exactly. So the first one is the future tense because it's got that yud as a marker. The second one is one of the easiest ones because it's a yay verb. I already told you about that. So you've got that for past tense. Number 5 is tishmor and shamarta.
Future, you will guard.
Right. Shamarta is
You guarded.
guarded.
You
Exactly.
done
Okay, we got that. Number 6 is halachnu and nelech. What's the root?
halach.
Halach. Hey, lamed kaf.
So
And halachnu is past or future.
past,
Past. It means we
will.
went. And nelech.
We will go.
Right.
Walk.
And so what helps here is it's giving it away because you can find the root in one of the two words easier. But I think it also helps just to keep associating in your brain the we part of it, the sense of the verb and everything. It's not a bad exercise, but ted'u and yedatem. Ted'u and yedatem. So what's your root?
Teda. Today.
It's not a
No. Yada.
right
Yada.
yada, right yada, yud dalet ayin, and it's easy to see in the past tense. We didn't drop any letters. We didn't drop the first letter for anything in the past tense. We would sometimes drop a hey at the end of a word. We've seen that happen, but we haven't dropped any first letters. So yud dalet ayin is the root. Yud dalet ayin is the root even for ted'u, even though you can't see it. It's still the root there.
You will know.
Y'all will know.
Oh, and then
You knew?
you knew.
And you knew, y'all knew. And then we have yashvu and yeshvu. So what's your root?
Shin vet. Oh no. Yud shin vet.
It is yud shin vet. Good. So, and which one is the past and which one is the future?
Yashvu should be, Yashvu is the past, Yeshvu is the future.
Exactly. And yashvu is the past because it starts with that yay verb thing. Yashvu and yeshvu. So one of the ways my professor taught us that kind of the reason why it goes to the A vowel here is because of the fallen letter. That it's kind of like a tombstone-y thing, that it's there. I mean, it kind of isn't, but I thought of it that way, and it helped me to remember the verbs sometimes. Helped me remember the vowel-y things. But anyway, yashvu and yeshvu do look perilously similar to each other, but if you notice the ah in the first one, then you know that the first root letter is a yud. It's got the ah under it. It will always do that in the past tense. And then the second one, you're expecting to have a yud in front of the verb, for they will. And there's no two yuds there because the yud is going to drop out each time. So, all right, so then we have ekach and lakachti. Ekach and lakachti. Number 9.
I will take.
I will take.
I took.
And lakachti is I took. And what's my root for that? Even for ekach? Lakach. So no one is going to stop you in the street. If you're reading your Torah here, you're going to read your Tanakh, and you get to a word and you see ekach, no one is going to ask you, well, what's the root of that one? All you have to do is remember is that means I will take. You don't have to remember at that moment in your life that the first root letter was a lamed and it disappeared, it dropped out. You don't have to remember that. You have to remember that ekach means I will take. Does that make sense? I mean, just to make you a little bit less, unfortunately, in this process. Number 10, eftach and patachti. Oh, they snuck in some real words. These are not drop letters at all. Eftach and patachti.
Matach. What's the
I will take. No.
I will liftach. What's the patach?
The take.
Nope, that's lakach. We're at number 10.
Patach.
Eftach.
Patach has something to do with your kamatz and patach.
Ha, that's good. Maybe. Oh, so if this is your patach, no, this is your patach. This is
Yeah.
kamatz. This is patach. No, that's good. We have to figure out why. No, sorry, I was thinking there's a ashrei yoshvei vetecha, patach yet. So you open your hand. Potech is to open. Potech et yadecha. It comes in a lot of prayers, and I always open my hand every time I hear that. Patach is. Here's a really weird way to remember this. I'm sure you're not going to remember this. You know you're supposed to redeem your firstborn son? Did you know that?
Yes. Yeah.
Only if your firstborn son is pitichat rechem. The rechem is the womb, although it's related, I think, to the word rachamim, which is mercy. But pitichat rechem means the opening of pitichat, like piticha is opening, pitichat is opening of rechem. So only if it's a naturally, if it wasn't cesarean, it has to open the womb. If the baby, the firstborn son is not a pitichat rechem, then you don't redeem it. So mom gave me her 5 silver coins so that I could redeem my child from the priest, the Kohen, but I didn't get to because Max, who was my firstborn, was not pitichat rechem because it was a cesarean. My mom had the coins still because I was the firstborn and I am not a male son. You only redeem the male sons. And, generations, we go back, we're passing down these same silver coins, getting ready to redeem our firstborn, and we get to keep the coins. It's called Pidyan Haben, which is redeeming the son. But Pitichat Rechem, that's another opening thing. You're not going to remember that, but that pops into my head. Pitichat Rechem. Anyway, Eftach is I will open. Patachti is I opened it. It reminds me of the Dunkin' Donuts guy. Did you know that today is National Donuts Day? Did you ever see that commercial? Time to make the donuts. I made the donuts. Time to make the donuts. I made the donuts. Eftach patachti. Eftach patachti. I will open it. I opened it. I will open it. I opened it. Okay. Same
What I
thing.
remember about that is that commercial came on in Shreveport well before there was a Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, I never understood that, why we had Dunkin' Donuts commercials way before we had Dunkin' Donuts. I didn't understand that at all. So then we had Malachta, number 11, and Timloch. Malachta.
I will rule.
Well, is it Malachti?
No. You will rule.
Atat Malachta. And Atat Timloch.
Rule.
I can get the root.
What's your root?
Malach.
Malachta and Timloch. And these are not drop letters, so unfortunately, I'm going to start with unfortunately. These are not drop letters. They're in the drop letter exercise, but they're not drop letters. So I don't want you to be scared of the drop letters. You've got this, guys. Matzata and Timtzei. Figure out what they mean, figure out the roots.
Matzah.
Matzah. I'm making you hungry. Or hamotzi. Yeah. Matzata. Matzat. It's a dyslexic matzah. Matzah. You found. And then timtzei is you will find. And it's to at. At is the pronoun. At is the subject. Matzat. And timtzei. And number 13, Yishlach and Shalach.
Shalach.
Shalach, the past tense. That's he did it.
Yay, verb. He did it. What was it that he did?
He sent.
He sent. And then Yishlach is he will send. I told you we had this really funny joke about every time I look at this word, I'm going to think about it. But that the command form for send is shalach. So Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, "Shalach et ami," send out my people. And one day, I don't remember why this was relevant, but I remember this happening in the sukkah. And Max and I were talking about something, and he was reading or doing something, and he said, he didn't say sh with the shin. He read it as a sin. He read salach et ami. And I wasn't looking at the word he was reading. All I heard him was say salach. And so salach with a samech not with a sin, but salach with a samech means forgive. So it cracked me up. I'm like, remember Moses said he had like a speech impediment. So maybe he couldn't say a sh, and he said sa, and he said to the Pharaoh, instead of saying, send out my people, he said, forgive my people. And the Pharaoh said, sure, they're forgiven. Now go back to work. We had this alternate version based on the shalach versus the salach. So now every time I see shalach, that's what I think of. Sure, you're forgiven. Number 14 is tizkor and zachra. Tizkor and zachra.
Zachar, is he remembered? I mean, not he remembered, but
Yeah, he. It's he. He is the subject in Hebrew, but it's not the subject in English. You meant he, but you didn't mean that he remembered. She remembered, but he zachra, exactly. And he tizkor. That's good. No, it's not confusing. Tizkor is she will remember, and zachra means she remembered. And the last one in this is shamanu and nishma.
We remembered.
Nope, shama.
heard. Yeah. But you're
Heard.
on
We forgot we're on a new verb.
Writing. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
heard.
Shamanu. Right, we heard. And nishma is
We will.
Will.
Here.
So, all right, I'm going to ask you a really picky question. Let's see if anybody, because I don't remember that everybody was in that class that time, and we will do these again. In number 14, you have two words. Each one has a shva. I'm going to ask if you can tell me if it's a moving shva or a resting shva. And I'm going to give you a hint that one is resting and one is moving. Sake. No. So, and you can tell from different ways. I'm going to tell you again that the words are tizkor and zachra. That might help.
Well, the
Tiz-
second one is moving.
The second word is moving, and tizkor is
It's resting.
resting. And how did you know that?
Because I heard you say it.
You heard, well, okay, and that's really, really important that you may be able to. I mean, who knew that you were going to be able to hear a soundless vowel one day? It's like the sound of one hand clapping. Who knew you were going to know that? So tiz kor, there's a pause between tiz and kor. You don't hear a, but zachra, you hear a ch, zachra. So that's one way of doing it, is being familiar enough with words. That's why I tell you, when you ask me, when I'm showing you these things and you're still learning the aleph bet and you're baba bibi boo booing, and someone says, well, what's the difference between a moving shva and a resting shva? And I'll say, I'll tell you when you're older. You need to know words before you can do it. So one really good way of learning is by hearing a lot of words. If you hear the words, you should hear them correctly. You won't always hear them correctly. So for example, you may hear, let's see if we have one. Sometimes we pronounce, well, we won't pronounce it as a resting or moving. Usually we won't pronounce the moving sometimes, but in this case you absolutely heard it right. So tizkor is resting and zachara is moving, but that's not the only thing that was a clue. Does anybody know other clues that'll tell you if it was resting or moving?
Knowing you probably has something to do with the dagesh.
Oh, yes. It does have to do with the dagesh. So there's never going to be a dagesh after a moving shva. So in the word tizkor, I will definitely have a dagesh at the beginning of a word or syllable that's after a closed syllable. So tizkor, you know it had to be a resting shva, even if you didn't hear it. Even if you saw it and I wasn't anywhere in sight, you would know that that's tizkor because it has to be a dagesh there, and so it has to be a resting shva before the dagesh. So that's a good one. The next one, you're not going to know that. Although the next one, you're not going to know it from that. Because the dagesh is not helpful. The non-dagesh is not helpful to tell you about the shva. But what happens is a syllable is made up either of a short vowel and a resting shva, like in tiz, kor, or a long vowel. So in zachra, you have a long vowel. So the very next thing is what's starting the syllable. And by definition, the moving shva is starting a word or syllable. So the fact that it's the vowel marker that's under the consonant that starts that syllable, it has to be a moving shva. Za. As a matter of fact, this is one of those examples. A lot of people, I'm going to just put it out there, are going to ignorantly pronounce this as Zachra. You're going to hear a lot of people say Zachra, as if there's a resting shva under the ch, and it is not a resting shva. Zachra is not Zachra, it's Zachra. There's a underneath there. Zachra. Pretty cool, huh?
Very.
All right,
It's
so
also hard to say it without a moving schwa.
I would like to think so. I'm hoping that you're getting there without it. But you could say Zachra. Lots of people do. All right, we had already done the Sue and Lou and whatever. Next time, I guess we'll be back at 13. I think that next week we do not have a class. I'm going to turn off.
That's correct.
So I can leave the recording on, but next week we don't have a class because I'm going to be at the Unexpected Modernism virtual premiere. They're still selling tickets. You could still go to that. B'nai Zion is a Wiener Brothers building. There are other Wiener Brothers buildings out there. We help to support this project, and I will be at that virtual thing. More announcements tomorrow night. We have a Veterans Shabbat and a Simcha Shabbat if your birthday or anniversary is in November, or if you want to help us honor our veterans. Services tomorrow night for that. I think on Sunday, do you all get the emails, the announcements? Okay, I'm going to be sending out the email soon, I hope. I think Sunday at around 11ish we'll be putting flags out at the cemetery for the veterans. It is not a Memorial Day, but we also have veterans who are now in the cemetery, and I honor their memory at Veterans Day like that. Wednesday we do have class, even though it is Veterans Day, unless I hear a strong objection. We're still having class Wednesday for Prayer Book Hebrew. And then next Thursday, we won't have the Unexpected Modernism. Next Friday is ISJL Shabbat, where we have an ISJL fellow, a nice young guy who's coming and he speaks to us there. And then on the 18th, we don't have Prayer Book Hebrew because I have a conflicting meeting, but the 19th we do. And I am presuming that the following week, which is the last full week of November, the 25th and 26th, we will not have classes at all for Thanksgiving week. That's my prediction. And then we get into December, and we have some programmings. The second week in December is already Chanukah. So we'll have to see about what happens to those things, okay? But are we okay with just progressing to the next chapter? Is that where is a good place for us to be right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you want us to do? What homework? Give me homework.
All right. So the as you know, and unless you've already done this, the best homework, I think, is if you want to do any of the exercises that are the exercises, it's the ones where you're translating from Hebrew to English. That's your first. And then I love when you do oral review, the beginning of the next chapter. Those are usually really good ways of making sure you understood the concepts that you had before. And usually they'll have a few sentences. At this stage, it's a few sentences, and there's a minor tweak between one and the next. And if you can get those tweaks, I think it helps you to understand Hebrew better. That's my goal. Obviously, if you also find yourself with lots of time and you want to, then the next harder thing is, can you write the answers from the English to the Hebrew? Can you do that? For you to write Hebrew. That has never been our goal. Our goal is that the Torah is already written. All you have to do is open up the page and understand it. But if you want, that's the next thing, okay?
So just finish up chapter 12 or start
Yes.
working?
No, finish chapter 12. And the chapter 13, the oral review, is a finishing of chapter 12, the way I see it. And we already did the Ruth story for 12. We actually already did 12 and 13, according to my records. We had caught up. We were about to do 14 adjectives. So I don't mind reviewing any of that again, but that was the plan. Okay.
Here's 12.
So we're going through chapter 12 so far. Okay, that's where we are. I am